19 will be taken. The House of Representatives voted Tuesday to extend the current state of emergency, SOE. 46 members voted in favor. 17 members of Parliament were absent. The current SOE came into effect in the St. Andrew South Police Division on July 7, and it will be extended for a further 90 days. The extension will see the enhanced security measure being maintained in the division. You should know that during the state of public emergency, the security forces have the power to search, curtail operating hours of business, restrict access to places, and detain persons without warrants. It also gives them the power to stop and question persons and seize property. That's what's on the agenda. It should be noted that elements of the day's agenda can be changed or moved. But before we go, here are a few things you should bear in mind if you plan to attend a session at Gordon House. No visitor shall create any act of disorder within the precincts of the House. No visitor shall be admitted to the House without first obtaining an admission card. Visitors who remain within the precincts of the House during a suspension of the session are asked to keep silent. No photography, videography, or sketching of the proceedings is allowed unless authorized by the presiding officer, and there should be no smoking inside the Parliamentary building. Now over to the proceedings.
More than grateful to be here in this moment. I just wanted to bring to our attention the fact that my personal journey, I think, has impacted many, and I'm happy to see the amount of persons who are stirred to take the initiative to see to their personal health, men and women alike, at all walks of life. I'm also heartened to see that there is a general impetus, not just on a national level, but within the communities of corporate world, the public institutions and spaces. You're seeing where there's a lot of initiative to bring an awareness, not just to breast cancer, but to health and healthy living. And I will just remind us all of the importance of taking the time in our busy lives to screen, to early detect, to prepare not just physically, but prepare mentally and spiritually for unexpected events that sometimes would seem as if they're insurmountable. But at the end of the day, preparation is the best prevention. And so in the event of those who may not be able to divert away from this affliction, the fact that you're able to do something about it. And what is wonderful is that in today's world, a diagnosis of cancer is no longer a death sentence. I am so very grateful for that. And so more and more, we're recognizing that this is something that can be overcome, and the efforts to bring awareness is one that I hope that we all will never forget, and we will hasten to remind our neighbors to pay attention to. And I join in all the efforts that are being made at all levels to raise awareness and to make the fight against cancer one that any and everyone is able to win. Without a doubt, I am again very grateful to be here to deliver this message today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Longmore.
Good day, everyone, Mr. President.
Good day.
Yeah, many of you might think it's uncharacteristic for a male to speak about breast cancer. Sapphire.
Many, not all.
Yeah, operative word, many.
Do not disturb
Sapphire, I share your pain, and I
Do not disturb him. He's speaking to Senator Sapphire.
sympathize with you and what you have been through. I have an aunt who died from breast cancer My father's sister, Auntie Maureen Horton, was diagnosed with breast cancer somewhere about 2013. She did one operation and we thought she was safe, and 2 years later it came back, but she wasn't lucky. She died. As a child growing up, I always loved breasts. My mother always said I'm a breast man. Even when I was 1 year and 2 months, I was still drinking breast milk. So yes, 1 year and 2 months, I was still drinking breast milk. So I am a breast man. When asked which part of the female you prefer, breasts. Otherwise, I prefer the breast. Now, give hope and save lives. That is the theme of this Breast Cancer Awareness Month. And I commend the efforts that have already been made by the Ministry of Health, made by the government and other organizations, but there is more work to be done. Now, cannabis, ganja, whatever you want to call it, is medicine, and it has been used to cure cancer all over the world, including breast cancer. I was reading an article this morning that was illustrating the use of cannabis oil to not only cure cancer, but if it is the case that it reoccurs, if cannabis wasn't the first treatment, it could prevent it from escalating. I think that this country has not understood properly the importance of the cannabis industry and the important role it plays in our theme, which is to give hope and save lives. I hope that the Jamaican government, the Cannabis Licensing Authority, will begin to understand the importance of this important industry, not just as it relates to industry and commerce and as it relates to gross domestic product, but as it relates to how the country will approach modern medicine for the future. Most of the modern medicinal companies, Bayer and among many others, have been investing severely in cannabis research in Israel and many other countries. It is time for Jamaica to realize that we are far behind in the mark, and while we cannot afford original medicine, meaning medicine that is synthetic, we can afford cannabis because cannabis grows naturally and wild here. The average cost per pound in Jamaica when grown outdoors is relatively $8,000 Jamaican dollars, while the average cost per pound in America is roughly $2,500 US. This is important because what it shows is that Jamaica has a significant comparative advantage in the production of this product. Now you have cannabis companies in Jamaica importing oil from China. Now you would imagine that Germany, who makes Mercedes-Benz, stop makes Mercedes-Benz and begin to import Corolla from China. That is the problem that we face now in a country like this, because ganja is to Jamaica like the Mercedes-Benz is to Germany. Let me repeat, ganja is to Jamaica like the Mercedes-Benz is to Germany. It is our name brand. It provides an industry upon which we can build the backbone of this country. This Breast Cancer Month is significant because it highlights that we want to give hope and we want to save lives. If it is the case that we truly want to give hope and we truly want to save lives, we have to make sure that we put all our efforts into cannabis research and the exploration of the medicinal aspects of cannabis. This means that when the police seize ganja that they find people with, they do not go to burn it. The police bring this ganja to a research facility, we can extract the oil, and the oil goes towards medicine. In this new world, we have to take the development of the country very serious. We cannot waste valuable resources. We have to understand that Jamaica now is a developing country, and every dollar lost creates a burden on the system. Every resource lost creates a burden on the system. Ganja is not our enemy. Ganja is a medicine. Ganja is our friend. Ganja will give us the opportunity to have hope, and ganja will save lives.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's always, the only observation I make is that it's always very good when one is looking at any form of treatment that you don't, or you recognize that perhaps the best approach is one that involves more than one type of treatment, and that the traditional treatments
There's no proof.
should never really be abandoned. That's the one observation that I have. Statements by ministers. Announcements.
Laid on the table of the Senate today are the following. Minister Paper number 68, entitled the Inter-American Development Bank Loan Funded Boosting Innovation, Growth and Entrepreneurial Ecosystem Project. Minister Paper number 69, Annual Report of the Coconut Industry Board for the year ended December 2017. Annual Report of the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Emergency Management for the year 2015-2016. The General Consumption Tax Amendment Regulations 2019. The Emergency Powers Number 2 Continuance Number 2 Resolution 2019 under the Emergency Powers Act.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Bills brought from the Honourable House of Representatives. Petitions. Papers. Reports from committees. Notices of motions given orally. Question and answers to questions. I'm sorry.
Mr. President, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the Senate, I will move the following motion. The Emergency Powers Act, the Emergency Powers Number 2 Continuance Number 2 Resolution 2019. Whereas, by virtue of Section 20, Subsection 1 and Subsection 2B of the Constitution of Jamaica, the Governor General may make a proclamation declaring that a state of public emergency exists if satisfied that the action has been taken or is immediately threatened by any person or body or persons of such a nature and on so extensive a scale as to be likely to endanger the public safety. And whereas the Governor General was satisfied that a state of public emergency existed as a result of the aforementioned circumstances, and whereas on the 7th day of July 2019, the Governor General by proclamation declared that a state of public emergency exists within parts of this parish of St. Andrew, as specified in the schedule to the proclamation, and hereinafter referred to as a specified community, and further declared that the said proclamation shall, unless previously revoked, remain in force for 14 days or for such longer period, not exceeding 3 months, as both Houses of Parliament may determine by a resolution supported by a 2/3 majority of all the members of each House. And whereas it is provided by Section 20, Subsection 3 of the Constitution of Jamaica, that a proclamation made by the Governor General for the purposes of and in accordance with that section shall, unless previously revoked, remain in force for 14 days or for such longer period not exceeding 3 months, as both Houses of Parliament may determine by a resolution supported by a 2/3 majority of all the members of each House. And whereas under the provisions of Section 3, Subsection 1 of the Emergency Powers Act, it is lawful for the Governor General during a state of public emergency, by order, to make regulations for securing the essentials of life to the community. And whereas the Governor General, in exercise of the powers conferred upon him by Section 3, Subsection 1 of the Emergency Powers Act, made the Emergency Powers Number 2 Regulations 2019 for securing the essentials of life to the specified community during the state of public emergency. And whereas Section 3, Subsection 4 of the Emergency Powers Act provides that any regulation so made shall be laid before the Senate and House of Representatives as soon as may be after they are made, and shall not continue in force after the expiration of 7 days from the time they are so laid before the Senate and the House of Representatives, whichever shall be the later, unless a resolution is passed by the Senate and House of Representatives providing for the continuance thereof. And whereas the Emergency Powers Number 2 Regulations 2019 were laid in the Senate on the 12th day of July 2019 and in the House of Representatives on the 16th day of July 2019, and whereas it was resolved by both Houses of Parliament that the state of public emergency as aforementioned remain and continue in force until the 5th day of October 2019, and whereas it is desirable that the state of public emergency declared as aforementioned remain and continue in force for a further period of 3 months until the 4th day of January 2020, and the emergency powers number 2 regulations 2019 continue in force until the expiration of the state of public emergency. Now therefore be it resolved by this Honourable House as follows. 1, this resolution may be cited as the emergency powers number 2 continuance number 2 resolution 2019. 2, the state of public emergency declared by the Governor General by proclamation on the 7th day of July 2019 shall remain in force for a further period of 3 months until the 4th day of January 2020. 3, the emergency powers number 2 regulations 2019 are hereby continued in force until the 4th day of January 2020. Mr. President, I further beg to give notice that at a later stage today, I will move for standing orders to be suspended to enable me to take the motion notice of which I gave.
Thank you, Minister. Questions and answers to questions.
Mr. President, last week there are some answers that were tabled for me, and I would want to find out if the minister would be prepared to answer the questions, and I have some follow-up questions that I would like to ask.
I think that Senator Marsh, we had laid the answers last week.
Yes,
that's the same set of questions? Okay.
Yes, they were tabled, and I was given the assurance that with the fact that minister isn't here.
I know, I'm just trying to remember what set they were. They were tabled last week.
Mr. President, I'm not sure, given that I'm not the portfolio minister, certainly if there are further questions, those questions would need to be submitted so that I could have the portfolio ministry address. But if it is that the senator would wish me to have the ministry present on the day so that we can go through, then perhaps we could do that at the next sitting. The answers have been tabled, but I would be unable to take those today, and the ministry is not present. So based on the nature of the questions, we can determine whether they would require to be tabled for further answering, or whether it is with the ministry's assistance I would be able to answer any follow-ups that you have.
Well, since you're not the portfolio minister, I would be prepared for you to get the relevant individuals from the ministry to be here for follow-up questions. For follow-up answers to the questions that I have, because they are very important, and I need to get some clarity. I need to get some clarity on the matter.
Thank you. And just to note that hopefully it can be managed effectively in that way. But I'm not sure if, in order to assist the process, normally where there are follow-up substantive questions, that is, it's not just for clarification of something that's in there and that is easily addressed, there would be further questions tabled, which could be addressed in that way if the portfolio holder is not here. So I would just give the caveat that depending on how involved the follow-ups are, you might want to consider whether you would want to table them and have them addressed in that way, rather than have me seeking with the technical persons, because the minister by right should have the ability to oversee the answers.
I think it's a stretch.
No, not a stretch at all. That's how they're managed.
No,
that's how they've always been managed.
Generally, when questions are asked and answers provided in this honorable chamber, the minister responds, and then there are follow-up questions without any technical person being present to ask. And I'm prepared to have the technical persons come and I ask the follow-up questions.
Yes, Senator Morris. The minister doesn't have an issue with that. What all the minister is saying is that if it is a situation where in your assessment would be requires so much of a in-depth knowledge of the running of the ministry, then you might want to write them if it is that you don't see that necessary, the caveat was just offered that she may have to take further instructions. That's all.
I'll be seeking clarification.
Okay, no problem. That's okay. Motions that may be made at commencement of public business requiring notice. Motions relating to the sitting of the Senate. Motions for leave to introduce bills. The presentation of bills without the leave of the Senate first obtained. Public business.
Mr. President, I now wish to move for suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take the motion notice of which I gave earlier.
You have heard the question. Those in favor? Aye. Against? Minister.
Mr. President, today we are here to debate the extension of the state of public emergency for the St. Andrew South Police Division. That is the specified community that has been named in the proclamation to which I referred earlier when I read the resolution before us. Mr. President, as with other areas where states of emergency have been declared, our intention today is to seek to continue to use this measure to save lives and to increase public order and public safety in the specified communities until we reach a point at which ordinary policing can sustain a normal state of citizen security and safety, of law and order. Mr. President, it remains a matter in which we continue to pursue a spirit of consensus, because we deeply believe not only that votes are required, not only do we know that votes are required across the aisle, but we deeply believe that ultimately these are goals and the types of matter on which we can agree. I say so, Mr. President, in the context where the government is clear that the state of emergency do not in and of themselves comprise a crime plan. It is not the equivalent, nor is it a substitute for a crime plan. So we are not trying to seek agreement that this is the way or should be the only way in which we seek to address violence in Jamaica. It is in fact the exact opposite. This is, however, Mr. President, a mechanism available where the circumstances outlined in our Constitution exist. That is, where there are levels of violent criminal activity experienced and threatened in the specified area of such a nature and of so extensive a scale that they endanger public safety. Mr. President, we believe and we rely on the assessments performed by the security forces. We believe that the high levels of murders and shootings, the gang activity, the levels of serious criminality in certain communities across Jamaica, including in South St. Andrew, that they threaten and produce circumstances which would fit squarely within the scope of the Constitution. We believe that the high levels of murders and shootings have in some ways been normalized not only in national discourse, but as has been shared by other members of the Senate, that they've been normalized on the ground and in people's minds as a sort of coping mechanism which belies the seriousness of the circumstances. They must, however, Mr. President, be recognized that they are not normal. They are emergency circumstances which require emergency responses. Mr. President, I want to reiterate that the government does not believe that states of public emergency should be viewed as a silver bullet. They're not a panacea, and it is not reasonable to think that they will solve all the entrenched ills that have plagued our communities for decades, Mr. President. But they are indisputably delivering results. They are saving lives and they are allowing the levels of fear in communities like South St. Andrew to be reduced, if not eliminated. As in the other areas where they have been declared, Mr. President, states of emergency have not eliminated murders in South St. Andrew. This does not mean that the mechanism, however, is failing. Murders rely on three things: means, motive, and opportunity. The states of emergency allow the security forces to address the means, Mr. President, by removing guns and ammunition from the streets, by forcing them into submission, Mr. President, these guns, this ammunition. These are the means by which the murders are carried out. Mr. President, they enable a sense of security that allows for information to be shared, for intelligence to be pursued. It allows for the removal of persons whom intelligence indicates to the security forces are involved directly and indirectly in murders and shootings and other violent crimes. It allows them to remove them from the streets. Mr. President, they address opportunity. By saturation of the relevant areas, Mr. President, by presence in the areas, they reduce the mobility and the means of operation of these violent criminals. They reduce the opportunity to commit crime. Mr. President, admittedly, in respect of motive, states of emergency would be limited in impact. That is an entirely different type of issue where we're dealing with the criminal mind. We're dealing with socioeconomic issues. We're dealing with matters beyond which a state of emergency can address. So again, we have to be realistic about what it is that we're dealing. We're dealing with the saving of lives, the resumption of public order, the increase of safety and security, and the return of communities to circumstances within which normal policing can sustain peace and security, and in which, of course, the other means of intervention and social restoration can operate and can have positive effect. Mr. President, as indicated earlier, I indicated that the government does not view this as the means of solving all the ills with which we address in these communities, nor across Jamaica. So we have Plan Secure Jamaica, which is a broad-ranging plan that deals with the many and varied aspects of security, cyber terrorism, border. We have the 5-pillar strategy, which is outlined in 214 pages, which describe the framework and initiatives that guide the approach of the Ministry of National Security in addressing the cycle of crime. By way of reminder, Mr. President, these pillars are effective policing, swift and sure justice, situational crime prevention through social intervention, and the reducing of re-offending. Mr. President, in addition, the Police Commissioner oversees the operational plans for his officers and the persons who report to them with key performance indicators. So there are frameworks that work from top to bottom of the security apparatus. Mr. President, in addressing the cycle of crime, the government is also working with local and international partners to implement the National Strategic Action to End Violence Against Women and Girls. The cycle, Mr. President, perpetuated by this gender-based violence is real, and we are addressing it. Mr. President, we're also working on ending violence against children generally, because we don't leave our boys out in understanding the role that the violence they experience and witness plays in the cycle of violent crime. Mr. President, you will hear more about our End Violence plan soon, but I will save the details, as they are not the focus of today's debate. Mr. President, programs like the National Youth Service Corps and HOPE, the rationalization of HEART and the NYS and the Jamaica Foundation for Lifelong Learning, their rationalization, increased funding on the path and focus on early childhood education. These are all part of the work underway to deal with our society and how it is we want to see it develop, how we want our human capacity, our human resources, our citizens, our boys, girls, men, and women to be able to self-actualize. Mr. President, increasing the mobility of our police with more cars, more bikes, other types of vehicles, rebuilding and renovating police stations, increasing their use of security both in the police stations and more widely, building out of the DNA lab and the DNA database, increased reliance on forensics. These are all ways in which we are taking action on crime and violence, but of course, with short, medium, and long-term goals and expectations. So, Mr. President, it bears repeating because sometimes people appear to forget that the problem of violence and violent crime has been being built up over decades. It manifests in a more concentrated areas, in concentrated areas, specific communities. However, the issues are fundamental and they require time to fix. So, Mr. President, as much as they cannot fit into neat 14-day, 30-day, or 90-day blocks, although they don't fit in within the scope of a year or maybe even an electoral term, the problems can be solved. We all as Jamaicans have to work together to make sure that the work that's needed on all fronts, that it is done. Because, Mr. President, we are working towards a Jamaica, a vision of Jamaica, where we can sleep with our doors and windows open. It's a vision in which we believe, and it's a vision in which we believe that everyone with any love in their hearts for their country or for their fellow man believes in as well. It must be something towards which we work. Mr. President, I say all of these things just to share the context in which we place our aim today, which is, as it has been before in similar debates, to make it clear that we are dealing with the issue of crime and violence, murders, Mr. President, murders and shootings on multiple fronts. So, Mr. President, the state of emergency don't solve every problem that we have, but they save lives, and they save lives in Southeast St. Andrew, and that is why we're here today. South St. Andrew. In South St. Andrew. Mr. President, there is no doubt that there is benefit being gained from the interventions in the affected communities in the South St. Andrew Police Division, which actually map the specified area. There have been significant reductions in crime in this area since July 7th of this year. I know and understand that it's not easy to come and have these debates where the fundamentals don't change, the fundamentals of what we're seeking to achieve and the fundamentals that drive the states of emergency. But we do it for our people, we do it for Jamaica, we do it because there are people who rely on us to see the bigger picture and understand that this is not going to be an easy road, but we all need to work together. Mr. President, it can't happen overnight. It's like building a house. Rebuilding Jamaica is like rebuilding a house. You need different materials, you need them at different times, you need different people on the team. You need strong leadership, strong management to ensure. You need a different focus when you're dealing with the foundation, when you're starting to build up. You need different elements, you need different skills. But when you get there, Mr. President, when you get there, everyone reaps the benefit of a strong house, strong Jamaica. Mr. President, as I pointed out the last time I stood in this house to speak on this matter, this part of the project, this part of the house building, this part is about overthrowing and disrupting the guns, the gangs, and the dons. The dons create the gangs and they arm them and create havoc and fear among the citizens. And it is this havoc, this enterprise, that we're trying to constrain and return to a state of manageability. Mr. President, this plank of the overall security strategy, this state of public emergency, must be given the opportunity to disassemble this triple threat that is operating in South St. Andrew. Mr. President, the state of emergency, state of public emergency that's before us today, if not extended, would expire tomorrow. Acting on the advice of the Commissioner of Police and the Chief of Defense Staff, it was assessed that the level of violent criminality experienced, continuing and threatening in the specified community remains of such a nature and on so extensive a scale that it endangers public safety. We have had successes, yes. It is working, yes. But the division is not where it needs to be. The community is not where it needs to be in terms of creating a space of public safety where it is not endangered at emergency levels. Mr. President, I spoke with someone just a couple days ago who asked me if I realized, and if I thought that my colleagues realized, that there are people who literally, when they hear that this matter is coming back to the Parliament, are in a state of anxiety, of extreme anxiety, wondering whether the next day the soldiers will leave. Mr. President, this is the reality. It is unfortunate that you can't understand. But Mr. President, this is the burden which we bear and the duty which we carry in this House. Lives, Mr. President. Lives. It's their powers. It's the powers that they have. I don't know why people keep raising that facile argument. But Mr. President, since the implementation of the state of emergency, over the comparative period of the 7th of July to the 28th of September, so that's the 7th of July when the state of emergency was declared in South St. Andrew up to the 28th, just last week. Mr. President, so 84 days, over the period of 84 since that declaration. When compared to the equivalent period just prior thereto, so the 14th of April to the 6th of July, that period, Mr. President, murders in the St. Andrews South Police Division have reduced by 58%. 58%. From 53 to 22, Mr. President, 58%. Shootings in the same division have been reduced by 47%, Mr. President, from 51 to 27. Mr. President, it's instructive to mention, because remember I spoke about crime and the ability to remove the ability, the opportunity, that there was an overall reduction in category 1 crimes, so murders, shootings, rape, aggravated assault, robbery, break-in, and larceny. Aggregated, Mr. President, they've been reduced by 40% in that division. Mr. President, Since the state of emergency was declared, the following seizures have been recorded: 12 firearms, 120 in ammunition, 8 magazines, and 11 persons have been arrested and charged. And Mr. President, I know some people are quick to say, only 12 guns? But I want you to think about, Mr. President, and I know you wouldn't ask the question, how many murders, one gun? How many lives, one gun?
Exactly.
When you hear 120 bullets, you say, oh, 120. 120 lives, Mr. President. So I want us to think about, Mr. President, the seriousness about the work that is at hand and to contextualize these things when they're put on the table. Mr. President, notwithstanding these gains, the St. Andrew South Police Division continues to raise significant security concerns nationally, statistically. Despite the reductions in murders and shootings which have been achieved since the start of the state of emergency, the number of murders and shootings remain high. Mr. President, so as at September 28th, even including, from the start of the year, even including the reductions, these figures stood at 116 murders, Mr. President, and 127 shootings. These are not normal numbers for such a small community, for such a small population, Mr. President. With reference to the globally recognized measure of homicides in relation to population, again, even after reductions since the state of emergency was declared, St. Andrews South, when you measure the year, measure from January, has experienced a rate of 59.7 murders per 100,000, 59.7. When you compare this to the 15.1 per 100 for the region, or the global average of 6.1 per 100,000, 59.7 is still the rate, notwithstanding the reductions. So I share these figures, Mr. President, to contextualize the assessment of the security forces in determining that the levels which continue to exist are such that they're appropriate for the extension sought today. Mr. President, the violence that is perpetuated there, intelligence has reflected that there are feuds involving 75 gangs in this area, Mr. President, operating within the boundaries of this state of emergency. There are varying sizes, there are varying levels of organization, arms, and wealth, but there are 75, Mr. President, operating within the boundaries of the state of emergency. That is an emergency, Mr. President, and it requires us, therefore, to give the security forces the time to ensure that these gangs who are heavily armed, who perpetuate violent criminal activity and cause a high level of fear and insecurity in the communities, that they are given the time, Mr. President, to bring this under control. Mr. President, more time is needed to achieve the objectives of deterring the intent and the will to perpetrate violent crime, of curtailing gang activity, of increasing public confidence, Mr. President, and public support in the furtherance of citizen security, because we realize that that is part of the cycle of intelligence receipt, of receiving information, is public confidence and support, their certainty in the presence and the confidence that they can give, the apprehension of wanted persons and persons of interest, the dislodging and dismantling of criminal gangs, the recovery of illegal weapons, ammunition, and other contraband, and the continual enhancement of intelligence gathering. Mr. President, recognizing the positive impact that the state of public emergency has had on the level of violent crime, but recognizing where the area still is, Mr. President, recognizing that there is time required for the re-establishment of the rule of law and to achieve the missions just outlined, it is imperative that this state of public emergency be allowed to continue for a further 90 days. Mr. President, it is within this context that I look forward to the contribution of my colleagues on both sides of this debate, as we ask that this Honourable Senate approves the extension of the state of emergency for a further period of 90 days. I thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Minister. Senator Skeffel.
Mr. President, as I listened to the Minister, I was hoping to be convinced that to give the support to this extension. Well, I'm still weighing my mind, but I hope during the course of the debate and indeed in the closing that the Minister can so convince that I will support. No, man, I mean, I'm voting.
The people didn't speak,
no,
the Minister spoke.
I am voting. I'm mind to further retard the convincing process.
I'm most unconvincing.
So, Mr. President, as we seek
Senator Skeffel, do not involve yourself in any banter.
You know I won't do that,
Make
Mr.
your
President. You know I won't do that, Mr. President. Mr. President, as we seek to pass yet another extension to the state of emergency, it is clear that the government has no clue as to how to tackle this problem of crime and violence plaguing our nation. It is clear. And this state of emergency extensions becoming a recurring decimal. If we should, by next week, we're going to ask for another extension for St. Catherine. And before the close of the year, we're going to come to those in Western Jamaica. So this state of emergency extension is becoming almost a fixed agenda item on the order paper here in the Senate. So it's clear that they have no clue to deal with the issues. The Prime Minister himself on Tuesday, speaking in the lower house, said that this method to crime fighting is not the most effective. So he admitted that. So it leaves one to ask a question. If this is so, why the continuation of this method? And what is preventing the government from designing and implementing the most effective crime strategy or the most effective method? Because if you're admitting that the current method is not the most effective, then what is preventing the government from designing and implementing the most effective method? Is it that they lack the innovation, creativity, and critical thinking skills to craft such strategy, Mr. President? We need to have the answer. Mr. President, in seeking to extend the current... You're in power. Mr. President, in seeking to extend the current SOE in St. Andrews South, let me ask, where is the report card on the current SOE? I heard the Minister, but she wasn't specific as to the outputs from the current SOE that we seek to extend. What are the objectives of the initiative? We need to be clear. Is the government achieving these objectives? If you're going to ask for an extension, you're going to measure performance. You must measure the performance against your objectives so we can clearly understand whether or not we are achieving the objectives. What will happen to these communities when the SOE ends? Or is it now the new norm to crime fighting to go on indefinitely? Every time we come here, we hear in the statement, we need more time, we need more time, we need more time. So it's clear that there's not a strategic or a comprehensive strategic approach to the solution. And of course, as admitted, the SO is not the most effective. So let us institute or implement the most effective method and judge that against our objectives in a broad sense, Mr. President. What are the attainment targets and how does the government assess this operation so as to determine success? Also, Mr. President, we heard about 12 guns being retrieved so far. If we have unlimited state power and an state of emergency in an area, what are the constraints preventing us from getting more guns? Government need to tell us that. Because you have absolute power under state of emergency to go and search for these guns that we all admit exist. Nobody denying that guns are in the communities. And if you draw for your last card, Senator Gale, a state of emergency, 12, salute, because 12 less in the street. No, 12 less in the street, but let's be conscious. It's 12 less in the street. But you have, no, but I'm saying, what are the constraints if you are using absolute power under our Constitution by a state of emergency? What are the constraints preventing us from going into communities and in a coordinated effort and search for these guns? Is it that we are not doing that, or we are just hoping to get them by the way? So we need to ask, are we using the state of emergency in the most effective way? The powers given to this security force in the most effective way to get all the guns, or as many. Because if we do not intend this to be a perpetual policy or action, when it ends, we want not just to reduce murder, which is good, but we want to get the guns from the street, from the communities, so we can normalize communities as we move forward. So as part of the assessment as a government, while you celebrate the reduction in murder, as part of your assessment is what are the challenges preventing us from getting the guns if we are using quote unquote this extraordinary power. And that's what good managers do. While you hear the successes, why has it not been more effective in getting more than 12 guns after 90 days? While we see 90 more. No, I'm not, you know, you want to get in a quarrel. We want to achieve our objectives. I never curse the police, I support the police. How many gang members have been convicted? Before we speak about conviction, how many have been arrested and charged? We spoke about 75 gangs. If we are not using this power effectively to dismantle the gangs, so how many gangs have been dismantled? How many gang members have been charged and arrested? And how many of these gang members have been convicted? To say we have 75, and it seems to be a growing number, but whatever it is, what we need to say to the nation, of the 75, as of this date, we have dismantled 5, 10, 15. We have arrested 10 gang leaders, 100 gang members. We have built sufficient evidence, and we have charged them, and the court system is now proceeding for conviction. Because until we reach that endpoint, Senator Charles, we have not really solved the problem. It's a band-aid treatment. And after the lifting of the state of emergency, then what are the guarantees that will not go back to what existed before? So we have to use the extraordinary powers also, while we reduce murders, to get rid of those violence producers, which we are saying ultimately are primarily our gang leaders when it comes to hard criminal activities. We understand domestic violence under a state of emergency, hard to deal with it. But if you did the research, it must be on the evidence why you call for this extraordinary power. So you must now use the power to act upon the evidence or the data that you have and dismantle the gangs and the gang leaders and go for them. Unless you're not, but what I'm asking the minister in representation did not give us the report card on that. It's a continuous assessment to do, you know. So you have to give an update on the attainment targets as you seek an extension. So she says 75 gangs. But no, I'm not talking about murders. I'm not talking about murders. That's only one target. But the gang members are the violent producers. So how many gangs of the 75 have been dismantled? How many gang leaders are currently behind bars and arrested with sufficient evidence they can take Senator Sinclair to the court of the land and positively believe that we can get a conviction? Are you a gang leader? If you are one, we'll take you, but I sure you're not one.
I will check the stone crusher recording.
Mr. President, also, what is the total cost of the current SOE in South St. Andrews? And the total cost of SOEs nationally, which is now in 7 parishes and going for some 2 years upon its first introduction. And I ask that, no, I'm not measuring lives in dollars. You don't even hear the point, they're drawing the conclusion. Is this the most effective way to achieve the objectives in spending our limited resources when it comes to crime fighting? So we need to know. So even if we're talking about measuring lives, we have to give an account to the public. It's the public money. It's the public person in the way. So whatever output you have for grace, you have to go to your board and give a report. The country, members of the society are a shareholder. So you have to say, okay, we have put this sum of the taxpayers' dollar in this method that we think will achieve the objective, and here are the results. So you are getting value for your money. It's not measuring lives. Please don't trivialize it. It's an accountability that we must hold our leaders to at all levels. Don't trivialize it. And we know that the killing continues in SOEs, so we need to continue the efforts as we fight crime. So, President, this continued use of SOE by the government is a signal that the government is bankrupt where ideas are concerned. And simply put, the government has no clue when it comes to effective crime fighting. I'm also concerned about the psychological effect that these SOEs must be having on the security personnel and their families, Mr. President. Right? So we are also concerned about that. Mr. President, there are many hurdles in our society that prevents effective crime fighting. Among them is our prison and rehabilitation system. Instead of providing effective protection to the public and the punishment and rehabilitation of criminals, our prison and justice system has failed to break the cycle of crime and reoffending. A large number of our prisoners are repeat offenders, signaling a failure with respect to our rehabilitation mechanisms, therefore costing the public purse a large sum of money each year. An effective approach to cutting crime must be to ensure that prison sentences and rehabilitation work well as a means to prevent repeat offenders and serve as a resistive tool to potential criminals. So we need to transform that aspect of our system so it works with effective hard police and a good judicial system and a good rehabilitation system as all work in an integrated way as we seek to solve the problem. Also, Mr. President, the current state of our police force must be assessed, and we need to accelerate the reform agenda so as to modernize the force, promote its professionalism, so we can have an independent force equipped with the necessary skill set to build its intelligent capabilities as we seek to enhance our investigative capacity and build good case management so we can have sufficient good convictions.
Right.
So, President, we need to ensure that there is no government interference in our police force. And I say that seriously, that this will prevent the police from having the autonomy and the authority to move forward. We need to ensure, as senior have it, when there's a conflict between operations and policies, it has happened over many years. Let's not put on the blinkers and pretend we are living in a perfect Jamaica. When there is an overlap and interference with operations, we know it can lead many times to not effective investigation and honesty and truth and corruption conceit. So I'm just warning the society that we need to ensure that there's no interference. Whether it is your side or our side in power, we need to ensure that the police is given a free hand to carry out their work and fear of none. We need to ensure that. None of us can argue with that. None of us can argue with that. You don't need to defend that. We must be at one where that is concerned. So, President, there is a view in the public domain that the police force has become responsive to targets and bureaucracy rather than to people, and they have become disconnected from the public they serve. We need to change that perception, Mr. President. Many persons in the public find it difficult to gain access to police authority. If they have a problem, and even when they do, the response time remains a big issue, Mr. President. This has left communities feeling disempowered from the fight to cut crime, and therefore they withdraw from the process, and much needed information is therefore not given to the police. But let me pause to commend the many hard-working men and women of the police force for sticking to serve, protect, and reassure the society under some conditions that sometimes makes it difficult for them to operate. Not cursing. No, you see, you want to confuse the things.
You must pay attention to them.
No, I'm not paying attention to him, I'm correcting him.
Yeah, don't pay attention to those who are not.
So while we commend those that are doing well, we must understand that there's always room for modernization. There's always room for greater efficiency. So if you see suggestion as cursing, then that's a myopic view and your percent of Sinclair, and you need to get up and understand the trust forward.
You just want to be seen. Skepper, ignore it. Not important.
So President, may I be protected?
You don't need no protection, just ignore it. Just ignore it.
Senator Skeffrey, just continue and address me, Senator Sinclair. Senator Sinclair.
Mr. President.
Senator Sinclair, you need to stop. Allow the member to be heard in silence, please.
Mr. President, most of our people today are losing faith in the rule of law. Most of our people today, Mr. President, are losing faith in the rule of law. And are of the view that the laws are not being enforced. And lawlessness rules supreme. And the wrongdoers have more freedom in today's Jamaica than decent, law-abiding citizens. Therefore, disorder and the free-for-all mentality now rule supreme in our society. These are critical ingredients that foster crime and violence. Mr. President, in our fight against crime, we must restore order in the society. We must rekindle the spirit of respect for the rule of law. We must start with the basic or simple laws, but the important ones to restore order, and people understand that the state is serious, no matter the simple nature of the law. So if they break the law, justice will be done, transparent and free. So we need to ensure, Mr. President, where we think the law needs to change, we amend, but once we have it on the books, we must enforce and enforce with zero tolerance and favor to none, irrespective of the connections that many of you think you may have.
Skillfree. Bowser, the man with the rich person who put a Bowser in an iron sure.
Should not.
Stop a police. Right? Talk about that.
So, President,
Talk about that why you can't find Bowser.
We must start in our major towns and capitals. We must, in a just and equitable way, reinstitute order on our roads, in our public institutions, reignite high high family values while we protect our children and care for the elderly. Mr. President, these are critical prerequisites if we are to have a gentler and kinder Jamaica. One where aggression, if exists, will be channeled towards eradicating negative energy and practices from our society as we seek to reduce crime and violence and key among them murder. We must ensure that we create communities with an environment conducive to harmonious living. Communities with basic infrastructure fitting for human beings to live, where they can feel a sense of belonging as they seek the comfort of a life deserving for sons and daughters of our nation, Jamaica land we love.
Cabinet secret. Not a cabinet.
Saliva.
I cannot hear you disturb.
We look a spirit in it. So, President, in any fight against crime, in any fight against crime, the school system must play a pivotal role. We must ensure that all children are in school and are attending on a regular basis. And truancy is reduced as much as possible, Mr. President. All stakeholders in the school system. Therefore, we must modernize our schools and make them attractive to our children. We must end the shift system. We must end the shift system that still exists in our education system today, even at the primary level. What is the connection here, Mr. President? You might be asking. Our children, when they are not in school, they become an easy target for recruitment to gangs. When due to a shift system in our schools, they spend half the day most times having nothing to do. They become easy target for gang recruitment. When there's little or no opportunity in schools for extracurricular activities, such as what exists in the shift system, such good potential energy within our youngsters may transform into negative action which may be criminal in nature. We need to ensure that we enforce compulsory attendance for all our children 6 to 17 years, Mr. President. We must do this in order to reduce the possibility for a gang recruitment within our communities. Mr. President, reinforcement of positive values and attitude. Book is in my brain. Mr. President, reinforcement of positive value and attitude. Yes. Respect for self and others. Yes. As well as critical soft skills such as cooperating, consensus building, compromising, conflict management are best taught in our schools. So we need to ensure that all our children of school age are in schools and attend frequently. The state must provide, including Sunday school, the state must provide for needy ones if we are serious in building a society where order is maintained, crime is low, and inequality is not a factor that retards one's progress, Mr. President. We pass them daily on the street, Mr. President, our children I'm talking. They are not in school and we do nothing. We see them at the stoplights every day, from 6 until 6, even beyond. We see them in town centers begging, or in the communities during school hours just idling. Easy targets for gang recruitment. Because we leave them unattended. Where are the parents, Mr. President? Where are the state officials? Where are the Ministry of Education officials?
I don't know, Senator Ben will be disrupted, you know.
Where are the SDC officials? The police?
Ronnie. Ronnie. What spirit is in that?
Mr. President.
Senator,
President, a point of order. Because I'm certain that the standing order makes provision for members to make their presentation uninterrupted. And the member, I am not getting a chance, Mr. President, to hear the member's presentation.
See, let me tell you,
I'm asking you kindly to rein in the members who are disrupting the member.
Let me be perfectly, Senator Mark. Senator Morris, you know that Senator Sceffrey is one of the chief interrupters, you know. So I never really believed that he needed protection. But since you call on it, Senator Sceffrey, like every other member of this Senate, deserves to be heard in silence, notwithstanding his antecedents. So proceed.
Mr. President, I don't see him as interrupting me, you know. It's good to have cheerleaders. So I thank them for cheering me along. Yes, thank you. So, Mr. President, as I said, we see these children all over the society. We are the parents. We are the state officials, the MOE officials, SDC officials, the police officials from the Office of the Children's Advocate. And, Mr. President,
did you have a whiff this morning?
I want to reinforce a call made 2 weeks ago by colleague Senator Morris. It proves the point for the need for the social workers within our communities sufficiently deployed and organized to have intervention with the families to ensure, for example, all our children of school age are in school, whether or not they can afford it, and the state must take care of them. We can't be seeing the problems, pretending all is well, and then we surprised at the high murder rate, high number of gangs that this doesn't creep on us by night, Mr. President. Absolutely. It builds and we watch it and we do nothing. Time come, we must take the corrective measure as we move forward. We leave them to the mercy of criminals. You say, Senator Sinclair, you keep on looking the way view mirror. I look in the windscreen and move forward. Let's look forward, not in the way view mirror. You have to glance at that time, but the greater focus must be on the windscreen as we learn our lessons and move forward as a society.
Looking forward.
Way view mirror. That's what he looks like. We leave them to the mercy of criminals, Mr. President, gang leaders, and then we wonder why we are in the state we are in. We watch the soap getting slippery. Then we try to introduce intervention programs to correct what the state should naturally do, Mr. President. And we wonder why so many young people are involved in criminal activities. After watching the social ill expanding, I have the capacity to write my own speeches, unlike you. We then, as a solution, institute state of emergency on our people because of the failure of the state to enforce our laws and to maintain order in our society. So decent, law-abiding citizens must surrender their rights because of the inefficiency and failure of the state. It is wrong, Mr. President. Restricting the rights of the masses by means of never-ending state of emergencies can't be the answer to crime fighting in a democratic state, Mr. President. We are fast becoming a military state. Yes. And worse, we have a government that is clueless in dealing with the problem, Mr. President. Mr. President, As a nation, over the years, despite the efforts, I am still of the view that we have not paid enough and focused attention to serious and organized crime. This type of crime, in my view, can be attacked effectively only by coordinated effort that brings together policing at the community level, parish and national level, and indeed international levels. I think we have too many agencies working disjointly on border controls and security with no clear strategy. Streamlined process or clear accountability about how goods and people move through checks and controls. There have been insufficient coordination of policing serious and organized crime from community to parish to national level. There is a notion that MOCA has not yet developed that confidence and reputation that is needed to tackle organized crime. Let me hope that they will quickly develop the integrity and independence to operate objectively as they carry out their mandate and go after the real kingfish of criminal activities in Jamaica once and for all, Mr. President. Mr. President, I heard the Minister of National Security and officials in the police force speaking specifically to the fact that social intervention program has not worked in solving crime, I think exactly in St. James. But I want to issue a caution that we must not confuse infrastructure development with social infrastructure intervention. You can put in the roads, the multi-purpose courts, remove zinc fence. It does not equate necessarily to, well, on a man, does not equate necessarily to, does not equate, as I said, for example,
him somewhere.
Mr. President, the Speaker's time having expired, might it be expanded? Might it be extended to allow him to complete his presentation?
Aye.
Yes, speak on.
So, I said, for example, those are some activities. Good they are. Senator Sinclair, reduce your kinetic energy and calm. And reduce your kinetic energy and calm.
Does he have any? Does he have any?
But, Mr. President, if we study the work of the PMI, for example, with limited resources, social intervention has worked. Limited, don't care what you have. Right now, the budget needs to be replenished. Right, they have cut down on some of the programs that they are doing because of lack of resources. So you can answer. So we need to continue not to lick social intervention. Do the research. Look at the issues coming from the research. But for you to say and paint in a broad brush that it has failed, I think if that was not what was meant on the news, no, so it's a news. The minister therefore need to come out and call on the minister to come out and clarify what he meant. We understand sometimes headlines tells a different story. But he has not clarified the news, Mr. Minister. No, but it's not for me. It's for the society.
If you engage those with high kinetic energy, don't turn to
I'm trying to get into a state of inertia. Mr. President, I'm trying to get him into a state of inertia. No, but you're going to study science. You know you're a scientist. I heard you say on radio. You sound better on radio than in the Senate. Mr. President, we need to ensure that we couple and continue to accelerate community policing with the social intervention and the transformation with the infrastructure in the community. We need to continue to place focus on the neighborhood watches that we have, the community and the youth clubs effort, because all an integrated effort as we unite the community to bring the change that is needed and the success stories. Mr. President, as I come to an end, I noticed that we are asked to give us 90 days extension. I am concerned always about the impact it has on economic activities, more so at the micro level, for the small, micro and small businesses. We know that this is going to take us beyond Christmas. I am appealing to the government. If you pass it today, or if we can look at the date, we have to relax this in the Christmas period. There are many, while we balance, while we seek to solve the problem, using this as a tool, we have to balance the issue, Senator Sinclair.
Don't kill the people.
And you and I know the importance of the culture of the Christmas period. It's going to take us into January, Mr. President. I'm appealing to you, Mr. President, to use your high office to appeal to the authorities that I know you can best do. Let us see if we can relax this during the Christmas leading up to and immediately after. So we can give those who, many persons earn the last sum or hope to earn a last sum in Christmas to save for many, many months in the year. Senator Barham, you don't know about that, you're good. No, you don't know.
I'm used to.
Once upon a time, right? But the progress over the many years, 8.5 years, you have done well. The progress over the 8.5 years, you have done well. So we need to look on that. I'm appealing, Mr. President, for those vulnerable persons, our person who have the voice in this honorable. So in closing, Mr. President, while we seek to extend this SOE, and I'm still reflecting as to what I should do, and if you behave well for the rest of the debate, you might be able to convince me. But we must fight, while we fight crime and violence, critical part of the fight must be the fight against corruption. We must never lose that fight. We must twin them. We must integrate them as one fight as we seek to bring greater justice to society. And in closing, Mr. President, does it make sense we have all these initiatives and we don't have a good investigative mechanism and the justice system doesn't work well? And ultimately, we must take them from the street to the prison if they are found guilty based on the evidence provided. So, President, I know the government has no other solution.
That's right.
And government has to do what they have to do. So I wish them well as they continue in their bid to protect Jamaican people. How successful we are, time will tell. Thank you, Mr. President.
Your time, Sinclair. You have all the talk with Skipper. Your time, get up on top.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Skeffrey. Senator Charles.
Thank you. Thank you, President. You know, I don't intend to have an extended presentation. I will leave that to my colleague who will go into further detail. But I saw it fit and I asked the leader, Minister Kamina Johnson-Smith, whether she saw it appropriate. And I want to thank firstly, Mr. President, Shadow Minister, Senator Skeffrey. You know, Senator Skeffrey, you know, Senator, on a serious note, your presentation a while ago, your presentation was comprehensive and contained in it much of what I thought supported the presentation from our leader of government business. I know that you drew different conclusions but it seems that several of the things that you made a reference to are things that you would have Googled and you would have seen that are being done, considered, and acted on by this government. And so I want to thank you. You might have reached a different conclusion, but you have a substantive formula. Several students make mistakes, and we'll talk about that. But, Senator and colleagues, Senator Skeffrey a while ago said to my colleague, Senator Charles Sinclair, he called you kinetic energy. And as a scientist, it is very important that you made that reference, my friend. Because for those of us who know, energy is the ability for you to do work. Kinetic energy is referred to energy that is in motion, moving, getting it done. Potential energy is energy at rest. And so we take it. When you have a scientist on this side, be careful what you say, because I can understand it. And so we want to say to you, thank you. This is a government that is moving. We are the kinetic energy government. Thank you. Thank you. For years before, you have been the potential energy government. That is in a state of rest. We are getting things done. My friend, when I listen to you, what I heard is you are giving with one hand and taking back with another. You are expressing gratitude and respect to our police, saying we should listen to them. But then you're actually contradicting what our Prime Minister, the head of our Security Council, has said, is that the head of the JDF, the head of the JCF, who are the experts on the street analyzing the situation, have come to him and said, listen, Prime Minister, this is a concern. These are the areas. And we are asking this government to support the security forces in being able to execute their job. And so I am confused, my friend. I don't understand why you want to respect police, but then not listen to them. If he's hearing me, then there's a problem. So I need to I will accept that one. Senator Morris, it's all right. It's all right. Pray for him on Saturday, yeah? But I tell you, on a serious note, my friends, we have to decide what we want to be. And in Jamaica, I have lived in this country most of my life. I have seen governments simply talking. When you are in opposition, you have the capacity to talk about things. But when you are in government, you have to get them done. And this government is focused on doing what is right, not just what is expedient. I listened carefully to the leader of government business in her presentation this morning. And I must tell you, Mayor, His Worship, I am so proud to have listened to our leader of government business. The comprehensive presentation I heard today could be no better. My friend, don't worry about our seats. Worry about your seats. Whoever gets seat, we will get it victoriously. Don't worry about us. Don't worry about we. I must tell you, when you're in opposition, you can try to distract. When you're in opposition, you can talk. But in government, we have a responsibility to the people of this country. And when you speak about the state of emergency as it is some little game, What you do is you give empowered action to criminals. My friends, let us listen. Hold on. This is teaching, please. President and colleagues, on a very serious note, what we say in the Senate is going to send a message to the criminals. We must have a consensus on how we are going to fight crime. What we are doing has been very clearly said. I am serious about it. And let me tell you how we get serious about it, Senator Fraser-Binns. I look on the facts. As a scientist, I base what I do on evidence. It is the evidential basis that is going to guide us towards development. Listen to the facts. Our leader said it. Murders in that area reduced by 58% from 53 to 22. Shooting reduced by 47% from 51 to 27. And overall reductions in all Category 1 crimes by 40%. This is the facts. And I'm certain that if the media were to bring a camera into this Senate and individually put it to each senator and ask you, do you agree, do you support with the reductions in murders, shootings, and overall crime, what would your answer be? It could never be that I don't agree, that I don't support. And we must make that message clear to all those who seek to breach the rule of law and who seek to attack law-abiding citizens. The message must be consistent and clear. The murderers do not care whether you sit on that side or this side. The murderers don't care whether you are PNP or JLP or NDM or whatever. Therefore, our approach to solving these national security problems must be without the political blinders. My friends, again, I say to you, we want to talk about order and plans, but we must also be willing to accept the facts of what is taking place. I want to say, as I conclude, Senator Skeffrey, you raised some issues a while ago of which I am in support in relation to the approach to the gangs and the need for us to have specific information on how we are going to be treating with the gangs and how we are going to be treating with the environment that allows for the gangs to continue. And let me tell you, this is why I say your presentation is in support of the government. Because the leader of government business, in her presentation, I don't know if it wasn't heard, but I listened intently. She clarified and set out with certainty several activities that the government is pursuing and has completed and will continue to pursue that are going to allow for us to create an environment for our security forces to be more successful in their efforts. And I must tell you, in addition to that, we are aggressively, Mr. President, aggressively executing policies and programs to assist with social housing across this country, creating an environment where we have safe, affordable, and legal housing solutions for all Jamaicans. And if you see, if you look on the statistics of what this government has achieved in terms of putting in place housing offerings in the time that we've been here, it far exceeds what any government before us has been able to do. Mr. President, if you look, I will send you, Senator Morris, the statistics. Well, I challenge you, my friend. Give me a point of order and challenge what I said a while ago. You can't. I will bring you the statistics next time I come, just out of courtesy. Not only housing, but you don't have to go far to see the infrastructure development and improvements across the country. The basic needs that are being satisfied, Mr. President. What it says is that our Prime Minister, the Cabinet, the ministries, the agencies, the government appreciates the need for a comprehensive approach to development. How we are attacking the national security problems is not just with or through the National Security Ministry. The Prime Minister, Mr. President, has made it very, very clear. Mr. President, our Prime Minister has made it very clear that our efforts to create a Jamaica that is safe and where we can see the maintenance of law and order requires not just from the National Security Ministry, but all ministries. Education has seen increases in path. Labor and Social Security increases. Mr. President, and on and on. The fact of the matter, Mr. President, is that what I have heard from Senator Skeffrey today is a presentation in large part that supports the government. We just need for Senator Skeffrey and my friends to find a different formula in how they are examining the facts and the truth. The truth is that we will never solve our crime problem in an isolated way. We will not solve it if we approach it as a party or just this side. It requires the support, and therefore for those on that side, Mr. President, who have any question as to whether this government is open and embracing, let me say to you, as the Prime Minister has said, if you have a better solution, we are open, we are waiting, and we are welcoming. If you have the better solution that is more effective, please come. Many of those solutions that have been put forward are integrated into the several plans that have been put out by our leader of government business. Several of the plans. Mr. President, I thank you, and I want to specifically order in the House. Mr. President, I want to specifically thank all of the Jamaican citizens who we can sit here and talk. Police are at the front of this building. There are many people who last night down the road had to listen to gunshot. This morning had to listen to gunshot from one side of the street to the next side of the street. And do you know who they had to call? It is the same security force who this government is not just asking for respect, but is listening to, that had to go down there and create a solution to that problem. Mr. President, I say to all of my friends in the Senate and to all of Jamaica, this problem is a national problem. It's not a political problem, and it needs a national consensus to solve it. I thank you.
Thank you. Senator Senator Charles, thank you very much. Senator Fraser Binns, who is not known to be an interferer, will be heard in silence. Thank you.
Thank you for thank you for that, Mr. President, because you know, Mr. President, that I'm not an interferer. Mr. President, I stand to make some brief points, and in fact, this is my first contribution in all the debate in all the states of emergency. And I thought it important to speak at this point in the journey of the state of emergency, because I believe that I do have a few points which will help us to put some things in perspective. But you will allow me, sir, before I go to my presentation, to address an issue raised by my friend, Senator Charles, because he ended on a note which he spoke about several times during his presentation about a consensus on crime. And you know something, Senator Charles? There are very few things that get me annoyed, and that's one of them. And I say that because there is no truth, there is no good faith on your part. No, hold on. There is no show. There is no show. There is no show of good faith on your part or on the Prime Minister's part to build that national consensus.
A point of order, Mr. President. A point of order. My friend, I don't want the country to be misled based on that statement. Please allow me, permit me. Because and I just want to say two things.
I'm trying to listen to the point of order.
Permit me. I'm not trying to disturb Senator. Trust me. She's sensible in what she says. Firstly, what is being said is misleading. And why I say so, our Prime Minister himself has invited into the National Security Council a member of the opposition. Okay, so let's just get very clear. And so let's not say that. You are misleading Jamaica if you make that statement. Not only to mention that I, as a senator just a while ago, said that we invite and we welcome and embrace you. So,
1 minute. 1 minute. 1 minute, Senator Brown. 1 minute. Senator Charles, thank you for the intervention, but it's not a point of order.
Mr. President,
no, 1 minute, Senator Brown. 1 minute, Senator Brown. You can manage, man. You can manage. No, it's okay. What I think that perhaps caused some consternation is that it appears that you are imputing motive to a member of the lower house. So you can just perhaps reword it and continue.
On a point of order, Mr. President. Minister Charles should not be allowed to mislead the nation when he ought to know that on January 1st, the opposition leader met with the Prime Minister, and there was to be a follow-up meeting in which wasn't Senator then, Mr. Morgan had responsibility to arrange with Colin Campbell that follow-up meeting. Since January and up until day before yesterday, such a meeting had not taken place. And therefore he is misleading the nation.
No, Senator Charles, I'm not allowing it.
But when a colleague senator says that I'm misleading, it is then imputing motive to me. And that's a difficulty. Because in no way did I refer to anything about that specific circumstance. I am just very clear that when you say that this government and the Prime Minister is not moving towards consensus, it's wrong. The Prime Minister has invited the opposition and they are a member of the Security Council.
Senator Charles, the information shared by yourself and Senator Brown is very useful, but not in this format. Can you continue, Senator Fraser?
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for that, Mr. President. Mr. President, I am going to say that the call for a consensus on crime fighting lacks sincerity. And I am saying that Mr. President, at the risk of a point of order by my friend, I am saying that because the undisputed evidence, Senator Charles, is that notwithstanding that a member of the opposition sits on the council, there was an agreement to resume the Vale Royal talk. There was a further agreement, Senator Charles, that there would have been, coming out of that, Senator Charles, there was an agreement, and I am telling you that I am prepared to withdraw it if you can provide proof that what I'm saying is incorrect. But there is undisputed factual evidence, Mr. President, that there was an agreement that the Prime Minister would have had a meeting with the private sector and opposition and other stakeholders about crime and getting a national consensus on crime. No, Senator Charles, if it is
but again, Mr. President,
Senator Fraser-Vince.
Again,
it's a point of order.
It's a point of order.
Responding
yes.
to Senator Fraser-Vince is not a point of order, you know.
No, Mr.
So if you
President.
have a point of order, state
Mr.
it.
President, it's a point of order because again, I don't intend to disturb my friends when I'm allowed to speak.
Can I hear the point of order,
but
please?
I can't hear myself. It's difficult. Senator Brown's, that's his tone.
Can I hear the point of order, please?
Mr. President, my friend in her presentation again has said that the Prime Minister, there is even a National Partnership Council where the Prime Minister invites members from all different aspects of the country, civil society and otherwise. So there are several ways our Prime Minister is showing national consensus.
Senator Charles.
Several.
Look here, I'm going to ask two things. Senator Fraser-Vince?
Yes, Mr. President.
I'm going to ask you to continue, and I'm going to ask the senators not to misuse the standing orders by making statements. Senator Brown, it applies primarily to both yourself and Senator Charles. To allow the minister, allow the senator to continue. And I do not believe that the senator is intent on ascribing improper motive to any member of the lower house, but you could just continue, please, Senator Fraser-Vince.
Mr. President, not to belabor the point, but there's no motive. The facts speak for themselves, and that is all I will say. I shall now just make a few points relative to the states of emergency, and specifically to this state of emergency in South St. Andrew. I have come to the conclusion, Mr. President, that notwithstanding the pillars that have been spoken about on several occasions, particularly by the leader of government business and Senator Charles, Minister Charles that is, that the government indeed lacks a crime plan. And I say that because what has evolved over almost 2 years, 20 months of states of emergency, is a clear unrolling of activities ad hocly. In my mind, they lacked a central connectivity which would result in the reduction of crime. I want to go a little bit before the commencement of the state of emergency. And in 2017, I recall that there was a bill tabled and debated in this House called the Law Reform Zones of Special Operations, Special Security and Community Development Measures, called ZOZO. And I recall in that debate, Mr. President, that I spoke against it. In fact, I got some licks. Because two things I recall saying. One was that we did not need another piece of legislation because we have over 50 pieces of legislation to deal with crime and violence. And so what was required was an implementation and a resource of the agencies and the arms to ensure that the implementation and operationalization of these legislation come to effect. That's one thing I said. The other thing I said was that it doesn't matter how many pieces of legislation we have in this country. We have become a vile set of people. We have become cold and heartless. And what we needed to do was to do what David did and say, create in me a clean heart, oh God. And I also said that as a country, we need to turn our hearts to the Lord. And I remember getting a lot of licks for it. But interestingly, and also importantly, when this bill was being debated, Kavan, I want you to listen. When this bill was being debated, a lot of effort and emphasis was placed on the memorandum objects and reasons for the bill. And this is what the memorandum says. It says, crime in Jamaica is a multidimensional problem that requires a multifaceted response. And nobody disputes that. And it goes on to speak about the figures. At the second paragraph, towards the end, it said something which is of import to the debate here. And this is what it says. This act should not have the negative impact on Jamaica which could likely occur if a declaration of a state of public emergency was made.
Who decided that?
It further went on, the Prime Minister, it went on to say that the bill seeks to balance the need for security and the need for giving the members of the JCF and JDF certain essential powers that are required to address serious crimes on the one hand and upholding the rule of law and protecting and protecting and protecting the fundamental rights and freedoms of citizens on the other hand. And this was in 2013. So at the conclusion of this debate, I was left with a distinct impression that the zones of special operations would be the response to crime, albeit not in and of itself, but the response. Because that piece of legislation would have been the piece of legislation to give you that certain energy. My friend spoke about what kind of energy? Kinetic energy. Yes, kinetic, is that what it is? Kinetic energy. So the Zozo law would have given you that kinetic energy to deal with crime and violence. Regrettably, Mr. President, what we have seen is that the kinetic energy which was envisioned has faded and transformed into potential energy. A type of energy energy, Mr. President, that has not burnt out crime and violence, but has burnt out rights, individual rights. But it also confirms in my mind, Mr. President, that the government, with the greatest of respect, Senator Charles, really has no idea how to solve the crime. Because Because in 2017, Zozo, notwithstanding the fact that he had all these other pieces of legislation, Zozo was supposed to help you to do that. We're not talking about reading completely, but at least solve it to a reasonable level. Zozo was supposed to do that. You believe it. You ask us on this side to give you the support, and we give you, because let it not be said that we never supported it. We supported it and it became law. And to date, all you have to show for it is two communities in which Zozo has been declared. Mount Salem, too much to mention. Can't count on one hand. Mount Salem and Denham Town. Those are the two communities in which we have declared Zozo. If it is that the government was proactive and had the kind of kinetic energy that Senator Charles spoke about, then we would have recognized that this piece of legislation would not have that kind of impact that you so envisioned. And so when that didn't give you the result you want, you sit down and say, what else can I do? And you went to state of emergency, which has not worked. Mr. President, I'm still talking about Zozo. Because one of the things that was said that Zozo would do was to bring the social intervention, the softer side to communities. And we accept that there is some evidence, there's some information from the social scientists and anthropologists that confirms that there is a correlation between communities and how communities are managed and the organization of communities and crime and violence. And because of an acceptance of that, certainly I thought, that Zozo would have been implemented throughout Jamaica in a way that helps us to achieve our objective. But I was appalled. In fact, I was dumbfounded on the weekend when I read, flabbergasted, Senator Crawford, when I read in the papers a statement attributed to the Minister of National Security, General Secretary, relative to social intervention. Now, Senator Charles Sinclair told Senator Skeffrey that he only read the headline. He did not read everything. So I took the opportunity not just to read the headline, but to read the article, including quotations from what was said.
Sinclair coming like McCarthy from the Republican Party. Deny what is there. You're coming like McCarthy.
And he said, everything has failed.
Everything?
Social intervention has failed in St. James. And he went on to list. I agree with you, Senator Sinclair. It's foolishness. Because we believe that there is a role for social intervention. Now, I therefore ask the question, which is not unique to me, but is a question that the editorial asked, is a question that Mr. Levy, who has given his life, to my certain knowledge, Horace Levy, to violence prevention. And the question, and I'm sure that Senator Charles Sinclair is best able to relate the question, what advantage does the detention for an indefinite period in a state of emergency declared by the Governor General and announced by the Prime Minister have over a large number of security personnel positioned in a location by simple direction of the security heads? That is the question to be answered.
And that's what everybody is asking now.
An article in the Gleaner of October 4th, says, Dr. Chang and Prime Minister Andrew Holness have had over 20 months, counting from the start of the SOE in St. James in January 2018, in which to bring evidence of the superiority of the state of emergency in answer to that question. I know that in this house, in the other place, over and over and over, questions have been asked to provide that kind of information. How many gangs have been dismantled?
0.
Let us have it.
0 is the answer.
You know,
Don't trespass on something you don't.
Senator Morgan.
0 is the answer.
Senator Morgan, let me tell you something.
Senator Fraser Binns, address the chair, please.
And Mr. Chair, Mr. President, through you to Senator Morgan, I will say to him that confidence is silent, insecurities is loud. It may best suit him to listen.
How much gangs have been dismantled?
These questions have really not been answered, Mr. President. And I want to say something else, coming from the same article. Mr. Levy states, which I agree with, and regrettably, it does not appear that the Minister of National Security agrees with it. Social intervention has had life-saving results, specifically in respect of violence and murder. Social intervention has had life-saving results, specifically in respect of violence and murder. And so, Mr. President, if one is to accept what has been reported in the newspaper about statements attributable to the Minister of National Security, it then forces that one to question whether or not the ZOZO has not been applied in other communities because of that belief that social intervention is not working. It's a question. Then, Mr. President, let us look at the existing state of emergency. The present debate focuses on the state of emergency in South St. Andrew. And in South St. Andrew, it has been reported that over a 2-day period, 48 hours, there were 2 murders in an area that has an active state of emergency. And if I perhaps would use the words of the residents, then you can appreciate how they feel. And this is what one resident says. He says, this was in relation to the state of emergency in Montego Bay and the killing of Superman. He says, what me see Agwan made the state of emergency look like a joke. It is not like a night. This a broad daylight. Dog nyam we supper because them killer are not afraid to bust them gun anyway. And this is what a resident in a state of emergency community said in relation to the state of emergency. The article goes on to say that 3 persons were killed within 48 hours of the state of emergency. And so, Mr. President, it is not, there is no doubt, Senator Charles, and I may not know the ins and the outs like you, but I certainly know when something is working and when something is not working. And I certainly know Senator Charles Sinclair right from wrong. And there is absolutely no doubt that the state of emergency is not working. But let me tell you something. Let me tell you, Mr. President, I am going to support you. You know why I'm going to support you? I am going to support you for 2 reasons. One, I am going to support you, Senator Webley. So yes, you can tick my vote, because I am going to vote with you. Because one, what you have done as the government, as the custodian of the people to protect their lives, is you have failed to present a plan, but you have created an atmosphere because of your failure to present and implement a plan of fear. I am fearful, like almost every other citizen. So I'm supporting it. I am supporting it because the country, Mr. President. Am I disturbing the leader of government business, sir? I will have my seat. I think I'm disturbing her.
Yes. And they don't have no plan, sir.
Let us solve it.
No, I think I'm disturbing.
No,
I think I'm disturbing her.
Speak,
no, I will speak, but I don't want to speak when somebody's speaking.
Asking for some respect on this.
Randy, you just take an exercise to get away the Joe.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I am supporting it because I understand that the country is gripped by fear. And I too am fearful, and largely because this government has failed to create and design and implement a crime plan to stem crime and violence in this country. Mr. President, I am convinced that this government is unable to design, to create a crime plan. And you know, there's no pain in accepting one's weakness, because the truth is that nobody have all talents. But it is because of your inability to design and create and operationalize that crime plan why I am using this forum to ask that the Prime Minister reconvenes the Vale Royal talk, that he does what he promised to do over a year ago, which is to have a multi-stakeholder meeting to discuss crime and violence. It perhaps is in that consultation that the answer lies. And so, Mr. President, I know, and I am very much prepared, because I know that persons will come and they will say what they want to say, and they will allude to their own interpretation of motive. But let me say something. The solution to crime and violence is not far. When we look at what has happened in St. Thomas, where there is no state of emergency, where murder has been reduced by 32%, when we look at what has happened in the community of Augustown in 2016, it is evident that if we apply ourselves, it can be done. Mr. President, it must be done. We have seen also that the state of emergency is not the solution. Now, this is what was said by the acting superintendent in charge of St. Thomas, speaking about the reduction in crime and violence. And he says, of the measures employed by the local force to effect the decrease in various areas, we have been using operational measures to curtail these crimes, such as road policing activities, frequent snap raids, town sweeps, and intelligence-led policing operations. 32%. He goes on to say, we have been visiting violence producers and persons on curfew orders, a power which you can find in the Police Constabulary Force Act and in ZOZO. You don't need a state of emergency for that. We have been, critically he says, we have been conducting community meetings, school visits, and visiting the churches as well as organizing monthly church services. See there? 32% reduction in crime without a state of emergency. And then we looked at what has happened in Papini in 2016. And in 2016, if you take the time, you can go on YouTube and you will see the presentation by Capri. And they spoke in that presentation to the many things that they did. But what was not lost on them was the involvement and the engagement of the community. The involvement and the engagement of the stakeholders, the churches, the PMI, the Communities and Citizens Association, CSJP. They spoke about it. And so if you ask me, sitting on this side, the answer is not very far-fetched. All it requires is a little reaching out, a little working together, regardless of color, class, creed, or your political allegiance, and at the center of it, a little respect. A little respect by our leaders. We're going to disagree now. We're going to disagree because we're humans. But we're going to disagree with respect. And it requires seminally to all of this so that we can create the kind of Jamaica we want. It requires an acceptance that the power doesn't come from us. But as a country, we have to go back to our national anthem. Eternal Father, bless our land and call on the Lord. And He will help us. So divine intervention, you may laugh, you may not, I might be chastised, but I believe that through Him, all things are possible, including the consensus that we so crave for crime and violence to end. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Fraser-Binns. Senator Webby.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, I recognize that there is a lot of energy in the Senate this morning, and I wanted to wish Senator Charles Williams a happy birthday, but he's out of the chamber. Sinclair. Kinetic. Mr. President, let me start off by saying, Mr. President, that I rise to support the emergency power continuous number 2 resolution 2018, which will extend the state of emergency in St. Andrews South. Mr. President, my colleague and friend, Senator Lambert Brown, he and I are one in terms of data and looking at statistics and analyzing numbers, because facts are facts. So, Mr. President, in my preparation for this presentation, I noted the statistics relating to the crime rate
in the South St. Andrew South Division. Over the last 5 years, Mr. President, 539 murders were committed in that division. Last year, there were 148 murders. At the time of the imposition of the SOE in July, there were 94 murders. At that rate, 2019 could have passed the 2018 record, which is about 160, 161. Mr. President, the point was made by the leader of the House, and I think it worth repeating. Since the imposition of the SOE, the number of murders have significantly reduced, and by my calculation, Leader, it is by half. Senator Fraser-Binns, I know you spoke about the gangs, and it is my recollection, and I looked it up. The question about gangs, colleagues, it was actually asked by the shadow spokesman on security to the Prime Minister in the lower house. And the answer was given by the Prime Minister in the lower house and carried widely in the media. And the headlines was really 14 gangs with over 100 members to face the courts, quoted by the Prime Minister. So 14 gangs with over 100 members to face the courts. Mr. President, and this one really is for Senator Brown in terms of the numbers. As you'd say, we both love the numbers. Mr. President, if you look at, and I'm going to use Senator Skeffrey 2015 as a base year, because when you look at statistics and data, you have to look at it over a period of time. And next year is 2020, so you use a 5-year rolling. So, in 2015, accusatory crimes, which includes robbery, break-in, and larceny, the number in 2015 was 3,179 year-to-date. In 2019, year-to-date, it was 1,925. That's a 40% reduction in accusatory crimes. Mr. President, if you look at the data a little further, serious violent crimes, murder, shooting, rape, and assault. 2015, 2,732. In 2019, 2,552. Senator Samuda, that's a 7% reduction, or 180. However, if you want to analyze that some more, murders, 2015 was 917. 2019 was 976. So what we're seeing is a 6% increase in murders, 2015 year-to-date over 2019. What that is saying to me, Mr. President, that we need to focus on the real issue of guns and gangs as the main problem in our country. And it's straight, accusatory crimes down 40%, serious crimes down 7%, but murders up. So that is where you need to focus on. Mr. President, this issue is widespread and very deep. I'm not sure how many of you read the New York Times article in August 2015, where the headlines states, Mr. President, how American gun laws are fueling Jamaica's homicide cases. This is a big issue, Senator Brown. This is a big issue that is going to require a lot of resources to fight this crime problem. Mr. President, and Senator Charles said it, and I repeat it, and this has always been my position. The security forces, they have asked for an extension, and they have my full support. I have the greatest respect for our Commissioner of Police, Major General Anderson, and Chief of Staff, Major General Rocky Mead, who have shown themselves to be competent, committed, and strong leaders who have been marshalling their respective teams in these challenging times. They have asked, Mr. President, and I will support. Mr. President, there has been a lot of discussion about a crime plan. And I'm sure that I have heard on a number of occasions a crime plan. And I'm going to go through very quickly the crime plan as articulated by our Commissioner of Police. But I believe we both have consensus that both sides, the opposition and the government, we both agree that SOE is one of a number of strategies that we're using to fight this crime monster. It is part of the toolbox in terms of fighting this crime monster. Mr. President, I have had meetings with General Anthony Anderson. I find him to be very strategic in terms of his approach in fighting crime. And I went through what he described as a 7-point anti-crime plan. And let me share it with this Honourable House very quickly this morning, because there's always discussion about a crime plan. The number 1 strategic initiative, crime reduction and control. Number 2, improving public safety and citizen security. Number 3, which I think is very important, organizational restructuring and capacity building. I think, Senator Brown, if you look at the numbers, the current number in the force is about 11,000. The request is 14,000. So that is one of the areas. That is one of the areas that we have to look at in terms of ensuring that they have the right resources on the ground. And I go further. Having the right resources is one thing, but we need the technical training within the force to ensure that we can fight this monster. Because as I said to you earlier, based on the New York Times, this thing is transnational. Enhancing staff welfare. Enhancing professional standards, efficiency through technology, and one of the areas that I really believe that we can improve on is communication and engagement. It is my belief, Mr. President, that if executed well, the crime plan as outlined, as articulated by Major Anderson, can be the roadmap for creating a safer Jamaica for each and every one of us. There's one suggestion that I'd like to make, or encouragement. I'm encouraging the Commissioner of Police to indicate to the country in a consistent and timely manner on the progress with the crime plan. And that is why I made the point we need to look at improving our communication and engagement. I go further, Mr. President, that this crime plan should be smart, a term that we often use in the private sector. It should be smart. It should be specific. It should be measurable, supported by data analytics, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. So I'm encouraging our Commissioner to communicate with us about this current plan on an ongoing basis in a smart way. It must be specific, measurable, supported by data analytics, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. Mr. President, sometimes when I think about this crime situation, I really have to sympathize with the members of the security forces, as their job is not easy, and this is often compounded by the lack of resources. Each of the 7 pillars that I just outlined, or I just identified, is going to require substantial resources. The good news is that with the current fiscal position that where we know in terms of producing a surplus and fiscal management, I believe that there will be additional resources that the government can put towards fighting the crime. Mr. President, the transformation of the JDF into a modern, effective, and efficient police force is also an important aspect of the crime plan. The enactment of the Police Services Act alone will not make the difference, but it is a fundamental start to change. And I'm hoping that this bill will be tabled in the House in the shortest possible time, certainly by the end of the financial year. Mr. President, my final point in my contribution today is that, and I made it in my State of the Nation debate.
Mr. President, the time being 1:20, might the standing orders be suspended to allow the sitting to proceed beyond 1:30 to complete the business of the day.
The time should be extended beyond 1:20 to complete the business of the day. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. Senator.
point in my State of the Nation debate in 2018 where I said that one of the most important aspects in us fighting this crime problem is that of political unity. I indicated at the time, and I remember very clearly, I called it a wish. And my wish was for both sides to work together to present a united position on tackling crime. I thought I was not hearing correctly when I was listening to the parliamentary debate, but I distinctly remember that I heard the Honourable Prime Minister saying that there's a meeting being planned with the leader of the opposition to have discussions on tackling this tough national issue. Mr. President, Mr. President, it is about, and I thought when I heard leader that side, I thought I wasn't hearing right because you have gotten the impression that there was no discussion. So I went on RGR website on October 8th, that is the headlines. That the Prime Minister and the leader of the opposition is planning to meet to discuss this. But listen. Senator Scott March, with all due respect, we should be celebrating. We should be celebrating as a country. We should be celebrating as a country that they are meeting. But when I heard, I thought I got the impression that there was no meeting. Mr. President, I have one suggestion both to the Prime Minister and the leader of the opposition. I want to say, and I want to call on them, Senator Scott Motley, that the outcome of the discussions of this meeting, should be communicated to all Jamaica to reinforce that we are all together to eliminate this crime monster. And I would like to see the Prime Minister and Peter Phillips beside each other when this is communicated to all of Jamaica to show unity. Mr. President, I've watched the debate very carefully. We need, Mr. President, and I'm speaking as a private sector leader, we need to put aside the politics. We need to put aside the politics and tackle crime together in achieving our success of tackling crime. And that is why, with all due respect to the Honourable House, we should be celebrating. We should be celebrating and not be skeptical that there's going to be a meeting. I'm an optimist. The meeting is going to be good. Peter Phillips and Andrew Hall as the Prime Minister is going to be beside each other and they're going to be saying how they're going to be fighting crime together. Support me on this one now. Let us call on it. And you know what? It also sends a strong signal to the criminals that we are not divided. We are together. And we will, Mr. President and colleagues of this Honourable House, make Jamaica a safer place together. So in closing, Mr. President, I reiterate my support for the extension of the SOE in St. Andrews South. And as a Jamaican who loves my country, I support all strategies for fighting crime that will make Jamaica a peaceful, safe and secure country. We need to do it together. PNP, JLP, private sector, churches, everybody. That is the only way it's going to happen. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
So I'm good enough when we work as a private sector man.
Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Webby. Senator Brown.
I'm not even moving my chair today because I don't plan to be long. But let me say,
colleagues won't disturb you, I'm sure.
Let me say that, Senator Webby, I share some of what you say. But let me put some of it in context. In December, the opposition in the House did not support the renewal of the state of emergency because we didn't think it was working. Arising from that, society had an outcry that the leaders should come together. The leader of the opposition said certain conditions should be in place for the coming together. Lo and behold, as Senator Morgan knows, the Prime Minister invited the leader of the opposition on New Year's Day to a meeting. And the leader of the opposition dropped everything that he was doing and attended that New Year's Day meeting. Arising from that meeting, certain persons were given tasks to set up another meeting. One such person is Senator Nestor Morgan. He was a senator then, right? Working with the communications director for the PNP then, former Minister Colin Campbell. They were given the task of setting up a next meeting. One such date was set in January, but we told the Prime Minister to fly to St. Elizabeth. We are growing. And since January, Senator Webby, such a meeting has not taken place, despite the numerous requests by the leader of the opposition and the PNP for such a meeting to take place. Senator Webby, I can assure you that members of the private sector, academia, and the trade unions who gather in on a grouping called ACON, of which Senator Gale and myself are members, have been trying to bring the two sides together. I can say that ACON met with the Prime Minister and they met with the leader of the opposition separately. Any meeting that might have that was announced by the Prime Minister in the House is a result of the initiative of ACON. I know you celebrate ACON. With people like Doug Orion in it, you can't but celebrate it. Right? But let us be clear. To the extent that such a meeting was scheduled yesterday, I'm not aware if it took place. But the journey to that meeting had to come from pressure from outside rather than a natural love of consensus. So let us be clear. We on this side so desire a meeting that we set up our own summit with stakeholders, and we were happy that the Attorney General attended. We are determined to cooperate with the fight against crime. That is why we support you on the SOEs that you have called, even though some of us disagree because we feel it's unconstitutional, we feel it's oppressive, and we feel it's unnecessary to solve the crime problem. But we have supported you. So let me put that meeting in context. Right? Our leader, Dr. Peter Phillips, have been always ready and willing for such a meeting. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised that given the Prime Minister's busy schedule, it is the insistence of our leader that caused such a meeting to have taken place, if it did yesterday. We know. At least 4 of us sitting in this 5 are members of the shadow cabinet. We were and we are still. So we know, no, he's the Deputy General Secretary responsible for the election. So we know what is happening. So let me finish with the meeting. Senator Webby, it is good that they are meeting. The country needs, the country needs that meeting. You have the support of the opposition. The government tardiness is what needs to be addressed. Mr. President, sometimes it's a matter of trust why these meetings don't take place. And we hope we can build trust across the aisles on this issue. One way of building trust is, for example, to see the government keep its word when it gives. The leader of government business yesterday said that the government was withdrawing the 70-year secrecy, cabinet secrecy issue. And since the resolution was moved last week in this place, at which time I asked the minister, is it upward or downward adjustment? And I got no answer. I would expect that today, in this Senate, the resolution would be withdrawn. I expect we pass the item on the agenda. Let me finish. The item on the agenda about motions, right? Motions. What I mean? We could have moved it as the first item this morning. But until I raise it, we would know that they intend to remove the motion. But trust would require that the first thing you do is come to us and say, we made a blunder on the 70-year cabinet secrecy and we are withdrawing the resolution we put last week. If they come in this sitting and decide to remove that resolution, they will find total support on this side. Because it is the intention of our side, as soon as we will come back to government, that we would rescind such an obnoxious resolution order.
Mr. President,
that they're planning to.
A point of order, please. Because, I mean, I am...
State your point, Senator.
I'm hesitant, but I'm now compelled to ask that the member at least think of the relevance of what we're discussing, particularly.
No, you went house in all of that.
Particularly.
No, you go wide.
Please state the point. Senator Charles, state the point.
Particularly in a circumstance where it has already been articulated that the leader intends to do certain things. To make certain comments as he is making now is misleading, as if there was no intention, and he already knows what will take place. It is in the public domain and it's in the public. Please.
Senator Brown.
Mr. President, I'm offended when I'm told I'm misleading by saying that the government promised to withdraw the resolution.
Again, Mr. President.
I have not heard anything said today that they are withdrawing it. And I'm bringing it to the nation and your attention that resolution must be withdrawn about 70 years of secrecy. It must be withdrawn.
Am I on my feet?
Senator Brown.
I am on my feet. I am on my feet.
Senator Brown.
I am on my feet.
A point of order has been raised. Please.
Another one?
Let him state it, yes.
You know, Mr. President, there are going to always be times when we want to hear ourselves and we become exuberant.
You are
but
going
again,
to state the point.
All I'm saying, Mr. President, in my point of order, is that it doesn't serve any of us well to continue to use the Senate as a means of advancing political motive. It has already been...
Improper motive is being ascribed to me, and you are going to allow that, Mr. President?
It has been said
improper motive being ascribed to me?
Senator Brown, he's finishing the point. You are finishing the statement.
It has been said several times, Mr. President. It's in the public domain. The government intends to take a certain position, and the leader of government business will do so. We haven't reached that place in this Senate session as yet.
Point stated.
And he knows that as a senior person in the Parliament.
Thank you, sir. I repeat, Mr. President. Nobody told us this morning when they announced public business that they were going to take that resolution. Nobody told us that. That's a fact. That's a fact. That's a resolution that was moved last week in our absence.
A point of order again, Mr. President. Mr. President.
Mr. President, you hear that?
Mr. President.
I am chatting nonsense. That's what she said.
Mr. President.
That's what she's saying, you know. That's what she's saying. That's what she's saying. That's what she's saying.
When you point.
That's what she's saying. That's what she's saying.
Mr. President,
Have a seat.
I was in the process of having a point of order articulated.
I heard.
This is the third point of order I'm raising.
I'm allowed to do so.
No, just finish.
And
Mr. President, you were here at the start, like me. I didn't hear the government saying they were going to withdraw the resolution. I didn't hear it.
Senator Brown.
So I've said...
Senator Brown, hold on.
Yeah.
Just hold on a little bit. Don't get your kinetic energy level too high. As advised by the clerk, you have not yet reached the point where if there is going to be a withdrawal, it will be done, as advised by the clerk. So, hold on. If it reaches a point where the point is there and it's not done, I will point it out to you, and then you can make your point. But continue with the statement.
Mr. President, since I was not privy to the discussion between you and the clerk, and since as a member of the Senate I have a duty to raise these issues, I raised it.
I hear you.
And I got 3 points of order from the minister. Good.
Well done, Mr. President.
Thank you, sir. Because the point I was making is about trust in cooperation across the aisles. And that trust would have been breached if they didn't come and remove that resolution today. Let me move on, President. President, last Friday while we sat here, a commercial operation in Santa Cruz was robbed by 5 gunmen. I don't know if they have been caught. This week, in broad daylight in Montego Bay, a citizen, be he good or bad citizen, was murdered at about 9 o'clock in downtown Montego Bay. This week, 2 days ago in South St. Andrew, a resident citizen dropping his daughter to school, was gunned down in the morning about 9 o'clock in the middle of a state of emergency in southern St. Andrew. That has prompted one resident, according to the Observer, from Nelson Road in St. Andrew South, she called on the government to implement a serious crime plan. The resident, according to the Observer, who spoke on condition of anonymity, made the plea against the background of the person's murder. You don't want me to call names, but last week we talked about somebody who a dog had mauled. Decency, the funny thing, eh? The person continued, lamenting that the security measures currently in place were not sufficient to combat the murder problem the country is grappling with. The woman said, quote, "The state of emergency is not working. This thing, crime, here is really serious. We need a crime plan." That's the voice of a citizen in South St. Andrew. The woman told the Observer that a man had been shot dead Monday evening, while several residents were left scampering for safety when explosions were heard in the community. Mr. President, the pretty speech of your ministers here is not the reality being faced by the citizens in these communities. And I'm happy Senator Fraser Binns brought the citizen from Montego Bay view, and I'm bringing the citizen from South St. Andrew view. The citizen want a concentration of security forces. They want a concentration of security forces to overwhelm the criminals. That's what they want. But that's different. It's not the same thing as a state of a public emergency. A public emergency, a state of public emergency, is a different kettle of fish that should be used for a limited purpose. So the shock on of keeping it for 21 months, a rub off. In the middle of state of emergency, people are dying. People are being murdered. The effectiveness of it has been undermined by its long duration. It becomes the norm, and the criminals have become used to it and are realizing how to manipulate it and continue the shooting. Soon, Mr. President, it's going to die of its own order. We don't want that necessarily to happen, which is why we have called on the government to come together with the stakeholders, with the opposition, sit down and chart a path to a crime plan that works effectively against the criminals. That's what we're seeking, because the shock and awe is gone. President, I drive to Waterford some nights. I see the conditions that those policemen at the checkpoint have to face. In all of this rain, they just give them some plastic to wrap around the tent. Not only that, drive on Maxfield Avenue, you see the portable toilets. We need to ask about the quality of food for these security officers. How are they being treated? Are the commanding officers talking to them and getting and responding to their feedback about the state of policing? In the case of St. Catherine Waterford, all you see is two barriers. And the men and women, few of them, in a corner. It's just not working. It's time for the government to really ask itself, how long can we carry this on? It can't go for 5 to 7 years as the Prime Minister wishes. It's failing. Let me tell you something that is failing in the security apparatus. Somebody called me yesterday complaining. They can't get police records. They pay for it, they pay express, and they can't get the police record. If we can't get the citizen police record that they pay for, how can we really expect you to be spending so much money fighting through state of emergencies that not really giving us the effect? Year to date, up to Saturday, only 2 murders less than last year. Only 2 murders year to date up to Saturday gone. Check it if you get the reports. I have it. Only 2 murders less. So clearly, we are not showing the results we need. Stop just bang the desk and voting for this. Say to the government, as Senator Webby would in a board meeting, let us look at all the data. Not just cherry pick some. Something is fundamentally wrong with this approach. And I'm imploring the government to address it. I didn't mention, President, the schoolgirl coming from school, Holy Trinity, and got shot in South St. Andrew. Are we really satisfied that this is working? That where they're banging the desk and cheering, and Senator Charles getting up and cheerleading the House leader? Yes, that's what you're doing, man. You don't even realize it. Leave me make a speech, President. Unless I'm offending the standing order. Unless I'm offending the standing order. Let me make my speech. We are allowed to speak to each other. So through you, Mr. President, it strikes me that Senator Charles was just cheerleading the pretty speech of the minister when the people are dying out there. That's what I'm talking about.
I will continue to support when good things are said by this government leader.
Mr. President, the chair needs and the court tell them I was wasting them time. So, Mr. President, Mr. President, we in the opposition recognizes that for this motion to be passed in the Senate, you need at least 1 vote. At least 1 vote from this side. I will assure you, Mr. President, that that one vote will not be my vote. You know, I hear me say they get last time, they get time. So that vote is not going to be my vote today.
They get time done.
I am not saying you're not going to get one, maybe more, of the opposition side. But you need to understand that this opposition is not satisfied with how you are managing the fight against crime. The absence of the cooperation, the absence of a proper and comprehensive anti-crime plan has led me to the point that I cannot support. And the abuse that takes place. So I'm not supporting it. Let me make it clear. I'm not voting yea today. So when the clerk calls, she will not find my yea, she will not be able to write yea under my name. Because we're clear on that. So with that, Mr. President, I hope that if the government will understand, it's time to wheel and come again. It's time to have a broad-based discussion on crime fighting. It is time to ease the fear on our people. I am glad, was it Minister Charles who said, when you're in opposition, you can say certain things? Yeah, because that's what his Prime Minister now did when he was leading opposition. Said you could go to bed and with your door open, all of that. But now he's in, he realized that he's doing worse than what we were doing to bring crime down. And so, Mr. President, the record is there. As far as we are concerned, the SOE is as the man in Montego Bay say. What me say I go on make the state of emergency look like a joke. It is not like a night. It is broad daylight. So don't bother tell me you need to lock down the business place at 9 o'clock. Or even 11 o'clock now. The killings are taking place in broad daylight, in the most public of spaces. Senator Webby, time to take sleep, mark death. Fortunately, last week, faced by 5 gunmen, the staff of a commercial enterprise remained calm. Part of their training maybe, and lives were saved. Not the SOE saved those lives. Maybe the training that the company gave, how you react under pressure and in the face of criminality. I commend those from that commercial organization who may have done such training. Treat this extension that you may get today as a reason to sit down, think differently. Because don't take our kindness for weakness. May it please you, Mr. President.
I crave your indulgence, Mr. Crave your indulgence.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I know that there are persons across the aisle who have commitments today, so I will not be lengthy in my closure of this debate. Just a couple of things, points that I think are deserving of some note. One would be just to clarify that the information that was shared by Senator Fraser-Binns in respect of St. Thomas is good, it's interesting, and it's consistent with our understanding of what is happening as well. There's a multifaceted approach to fighting crime across the island, There are places and communities where normal policing efforts can have a positive impact and are having a positive impact, such as the example that you have just given. So citizen policing has not been abandoned. Engaging churches has not been abandoned. Having intelligence-led investigation and taking cases to court has not been abandoned. All of this has been happening across. It has been strengthened. And the fact is that results are taking place. Emergency measures, such as the one that we're debating today, have been targeted specifically for areas where the circumstances are so heightened and chronic that they demand emergency responses. So your position is exactly consistent with ours and our understanding of the security forces' advice. So we can't be guided to say that because certain efforts are working in a particular area, it means no state of emergency is necessary. It's the exact opposite. We have to target where it is that the emergency circumstances are. So I wanted to make that point clear. I also wanted to address a point in respect of the headline that had quoted Dr. Chang, and just give a little context, because I had the opportunity to discuss the matter with him. And he was explaining to me that the numbers, the sheer numbers in St. James, everyone can look at that and say that there is a challenge, there has been a challenge, despite the millions of dollars that have been poured into not only infrastructural work, but social interventions. And in speaking to the groups, the NGOs who were present, he was urging them to recognize that some of the ways that they are working, which is in instances siloed, because persons are focused on how their group can be recognized for a particular action, and therefore they don't partner, and it causes a lack of holistic treatment by them. And he wasn't saying that the numbers speak for themselves, the results speak for themselves. So he wasn't making a comment to say that social intervention does not work. But he's saying that the chronic situation and the way in which they have been working is such that it simply is clear. The facts speak for themselves. All of the parts of the puzzle need to work together, and this is what is actually happening. On the matter of consensus, we are committed to consensus, and I am pleased to remind members on both sides, of course, that we not only have the Partnership Council in which these discussions take place, but I had advised at the last debate that the Prime Minister had indicated that there would be a quote-unquote epoch-style oversight committee established to monitor progress, and that the framework for this, however, had to be developed. He had charged persons to set up a working group within the partnership, and they are working through and with this ACON group that has been mentioned to take that matter forward. The opposition is a part of that. And yes, the leader of the opposition and the Prime Minister met last night with representatives of the private sector and labor, and both were accompanied by the Minister of National Security and the opposition spokesperson for national security. So the discussions are taking place. They are building consensus. They are working on a way forward. But I suspect this information is important enough, given that they're addressing her concerns.
They're left in the dark.
So it's important.
They're left in the dark.
It's important for us to note the facts and ensure that we're all in the best position to understand the circumstances with which we're working. Mr. President, the numbers have been clear. The numbers are clear. The National Security Council continues to have we met as recently as yesterday, and the opposition spokesperson on finance was present and part of the understanding of data that was shared. The Partnership Council meets later this month, and undoubtedly there will be a further update on the consensus building there. Mr. President, the fact is that efforts are being made. And if we are truly committed to consensus, then we'll recognize the efforts for what they are and not try to score cheap points on the fact that somebody was unable to attend at a particular point. We must just work together and take the outcome as a positive where we are able. Mr. President, Mr. President, Mr. President,
know that the meeting was held. The meeting was held last night. I think that it's, you never know that when you were saying it, but if you didn't know that, you wouldn't be talking what you're saying. Minister, continue, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I'm wrapping up now. As I indicated, I really only had a few points to make. I shared data earlier about the percentage reduction in murders, shootings, and overall Category 1 crimes. I shared the data regarding the number of persons arrested and charged within the area in which we sit, as well as the guns and ammunition that have been secured as at September 28th. And in that context, Mr. President, I think that we have sufficient information before us to take a positive position here today, one that demonstrates, as Senator Webby was calling for earlier, as Senator Fraser-Binns and even Senator Brown were calling for, a consensual position that says that we will extend, we will support the security forces, and we will ensure that the state of public emergency in South St. Andrew will continue for a further 90 days. Mr. President, with that, I close and I look forward to the vote. Thank you.
Very much for those who have contributed. Madam Clerk, will you take the appropriate vote, please? But you have to do it on that. So those in favor, the clerk will take the relevant vote.
Senator Brim? Yes. Senator Brown? Senator Charles? Yes. Senator Crawford? Senator Fraser-Binns? Senator Gale? Senator Horton? Senator Hill? Yes. Senator Johnson-Smith? Yes. Senator Knight? Senator Longmore? Yes. Senator Morgan? Yes. Senator Morris? Senator Morrison? Yes. Senator Samuda? Yes. Senator Scott Motley? Senator Sinclair? Senator Skeffrey, Senator Webby, Senator Williams. Mr. President, I just
I do report the vote as follows. 15 ayes, no noes, no abstention, absent 6. The motion is approved. Minister?
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, the final item of business on which we wish to take or which we wish to work today is that I seek the leave of the Senate to withdraw the resolution standing in my name at item 3 on the order of business. Thank you, Mr. President. It is not intended to do any further business today. I ask that the Senate be adjourned to a date, for a date to be fixed. You're not raising it, should you? Okay.
Thank you very much. You have heard the motion. Question is the Senate be adjourned. Those in favor? Aye. Against? Senate now stands adjourned.
Yes, they're adjourned.
No.
The date is October 3. This is the news on PBC. Today is Friday, October 4. This is the news on PBCJ. I am Simone Absalom. Jamaicans are being advised to get ready for the largest initial public offer IPO in the country's history. The government is preparing to list Trans-Jamaican Highway on the Jamaica Stock Exchange. Finance Minister Dr. Nigel Clark made the announcement at a press conference Thursday.
This is likely in the transition in ownership that is going to come via an initial public offering to the public is likely to be the largest IPO in Jamaica's history. Much larger than Wigton, possibly multiples or a multiple or two or whatever of Wigton. Let us see. Let's see. And it's a process for which awareness has to be built because we want the investing public, retail and institutions to be ready.
No details of the offer, such as the share price or opening date, have yet been revealed. However, the administration is working to have the transaction done before the end of the current fiscal year in March. Trans-Jamaican Highway owns and operates the Kingston to Sandy Bay to May Pen, and Portmore legs of Highway 2000. Minister Clark says the opportunity has arisen for a transition in ownership.
Jamaicans have not been able to participate. Jamaica Public Service Company is not owned by Jamaicans. None of the IPPs, they're not owned by Jamaicans. Yet, these are amazing opportunities in which people have done incredibly well. Now, foreign participation is always needed and always required. But we want to ensure going forward there's a balance and that Jamaicans have an opportunity to participate in areas of the economy that hitherto we have not had that opportunity.
Prime Minister Andrew Holness says now is the right time for Jamaica to make a major shift towards using renewable energy sources to generate electricity. Speaking at the launch of the Paradise Park Solar Farm in Westmoreland, the Prime Minister said increasing the use of renewable energy is a form of protecting the environment, noting that his administration has been deliberate and decisive about protecting the environment.
This government of Jamaica has taken more environmentally protective steps than any other government in Jamaica. But we act in deliberate ways. We act in instrumental ways. We are not going to be swept by loud voices. We are not going to be swept and swayed by fads and favors. No. We will do our work. We will do our research. We will make our decisions empirically. We will study the data. And when we make the decisions, they are solid decisions which will ensure that Jamaica will move from poverty to prosperity.
The Prime Minister stated that Jamaica is looking to surpass the proposed target set by the Jamaica National Energy Policy of 20% of the renewables in the energy mix by 2030. With the addition of Solar Farm, Jamaica will now generate 17% of its electricity through wind, hydro and solar. That number could see the renewables target revised to be at least 50% of renewable energy resources by 2030.
So this is a signal to investors. It's a signal to the OUR. It's a signal to JPS. It's a signal to our financial market. It is a signal to the citizens of the country that your government is doing everything it can to ensure that we are protecting our own environment by using cleaner energy, but that we are also being good public citizens by ensuring that this global public good called the climate is protected.
Mr. Holness noted that in 2006, over 96% of the country's energy mix was petroleum-based. In 2016, when his administration assumed office, it dropped to 89.7%. In the meantime, Prime Minister Holness is encouraging more renewable energy partnerships to develop locally generated solar technology for export.
We want to see more of these kinds of partnerships where we bring in the right technology, where we are training our people, where our capital markets can be involved, and where Jamaicans are playing a lead role in bringing the project together and eventually having technology transfer. And one day, we will be developing our own indigenous, locally generated, and to be exported solar technology.
The Paradise Park Solar Farm is the largest in the English-speaking Caribbean and the second farm of its kind in Jamaica. It was built at a cost of $65 million and is to provide 37 megawatts of electricity, which is enough to supply 78,000 households. National Security Minister Horace Chang says human trafficking is the third most lucrative crime behind drugs and trafficking in firearms. Addressing the official launch of the Anti-Trafficking in Persons Clubs in Schools initiative on Thursday at the Dunoon Technical High School in Kingston, he noted that the criminal activity is growing as the government makes inroad into combating the drugs and firearms trades. He described human trafficking as a modern-day form of slavery, explaining that the clubs aim to sensitize young adults about human trafficking in order to prevent them from becoming victims. Minister Chang commended the 11 institutions across the island that have already joined the Anti-Trafficking Persons Clubs. 30 public bodies have been rationalized to date, with plans in place for another 18 entities to be merged into their parent ministries by the end of 2019. And about $1 billion in savings to the government has been realized from the venture. Executive Director of the Transformation Implementation Unit in the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service, Maria Thompson Walters, made the disclosure while speaking with Jamaica Information Service. Among the objectives of the rationalization process are to ensure greater efficiency and effectiveness in public sector service delivery, reduced costs, and improved governance. President of the People's National Party, PNP, Dr. Peter Phillips, Thursday afternoon announced the 19-portfolio Shadow Cabinet. It features Dr. Maurice Guy as the new leader of government business in the House and Westmoreland Central MP Dwayne Vaz as his deputy. Former Permanent Secretary in the Office of the Prime Minister, Elaine Foster-Allen, is the new Shadow Cabinet Secretary. Here's the list of the members of the opposition's Shadow Cabinet. A parliamentary committee wants sex offenders who have relocated or returned to the island to register in the Sex Offender Registry in Jamaica. It recommends that failure to register should constitute an offence and be punishable by imprisonment. Minister of Justice Delroy Chuck made the disclosure as he opened debate in the House of Representatives this week on the report of the Joint Select Committee appointed to complete the review of the Sexual Offences Act, the Offences Against the Persons Act, the Domestic Violence Act, and the Child Care and Protection Act.